All right, everybody, it is 4:06 p.m. on September 17th, 2025, and this is the Flagstaff Heritage Preservation Commission meeting called to order. We will start with roll call.
Emily Dale,
Present.
Alicia Hayes, Jesse Dominguez,
Present.
Amy Horn,
Present.
Bernadette Burcham,
Present.
Duffy Westheimer.
Here.
Thank you.
We will now move on to the land acknowledgement. Anybody want to read it this month? Anyone haven't gone in a while? All right.
The Heritage Preservation Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of the area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Thank you, Commissioner Burcham. Is this? Yes, okay. We will now move on to the open call to the public. If any member of the public would like to comment on an item not on the agenda, you can fill out one of these lovely little speaker request cards in the back. And we do have Charlie Silver. If you could please come up into the microphone, you will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, commission members. My name is Charlie Silver. I'm a 40-year resident of Flagstaff, and I wanted to convey to you and introduce an idea by someone who couldn't be here today, so I'm speaking on their behalf. I'd like to introduce an idea by John Westerlund. John is a 35-year Flagstaff resident. He is also the author of Arizona's War Town, subtitle Flagstaff, Navajo Ordnance Depot, and World War II. This is a seminal piece of work that is an awesome piece of literature that adds to our history in Northern Arizona. So verbatim, here is John Westerlund's write-up. This is called Flagstaff Historic Theme Project. Flagstaff might be the most western town in the West. Zane Grey certainly thought so. In his July 1925 letter to the editor of the Coconino Sun, he stated, "I have found more real Western stuff in the Sun than in all other publications I get. With this in mind, I, John, would like to propose a coordinated art and history project that would reflect a dozen or so of Flagstaff's major historic themes. Perhaps the Heritage Preservation Commission and the Beautification and Public Art Commission might be interested in managing this project. It could include life-size statues, large murals, and interpretive panels, as well as those historic sites and objects that are already in place. A rough draft of possible themes might include the native presence, Sinawa, Hopi, and Navajo. This could be reflected in a bronze statue or large mural. Westward exploration, fur trappers, the 1851 Sick Graves expedition, the Whipple and Beale expeditions, perhaps reflected in a large mural. The sheep and cattle industry could be represented in a large mural that includes the 5 Babbitt brothers, cowboys on the CO Bar Ranch, sheep, and cattle. Federal presence and vast public lands could be reflected in a large mural that includes the Fort Valley Experimental Station, the Coconino National Forest, and the Flagstaff Area National Monuments. Flagstaff is the only city in the U.S. that has a dozen national parks, national monuments, and national historic sites within a 2-hour drive. Federal presence and World War II, building of the massive U.S. Army Navajo Ordnance Depot 10 miles west of town in 1942, when 15,000 workers and families came into Flagstaff. This could be reflected with a statue of Navajo ammunition handler John Billy. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for attending. All right, is this our only card, Nancy? All right. We will now move on to the approval of minutes. Any comments, questions on the minutes? If not, can I get a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes from, what was the day?
August 20th.
August 20th.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Bertram and a second from Commissioner Dominguez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. We will now move on to our public hearing items, which is starting with, or I guess, and finishing with 205 South Park Street.
All right, hello, everyone. Lauren Clementino, Heritage Preservation Officer. I am going to introduce the item, and then Lynn Neal, the consultant who prepared the study, is here, as well as the property owners to address any questions. This is a phase 1 cultural resource study. It is a little unusual in that it is a study of a building that has already been demolished. And there's the background here, but just a quick recap. The building was demolished without a demolition permit. And when that was reported to the city, a stop work order was issued and an as-built demolition permit was required. And through that application process, the Heritage Preservation Code requirement to complete a study was brought up, and that is why we're looking at it here today. And there were 2 past inventories of the La Plaza Vieja area that were done as part of the South Side inventory in the 90s and last in 2007. And although that area ended up not being included in the final National Register Historic District, we do still have the inventory forms on file. And both of those had indicated that it likely was eligible for contribution to the district and individually. And so because of that, I asked for a phase 1 cultural resource study, which would be normal in the case of a building that with a previous eligibility recommendation or determination. And then a phase 1 resource study, of course, also if it's something's found to be significant, it has to include mitigation proposals as part of the phase 1. So that is the background. And with that, I'll let Neil, if you'd like to come up and introduce your findings. And I have the item here, and then I also have the reports up here if you.
Before you go, Lauren, does anyone have any questions for Lauren on just the timeline or any of the things she mentioned? I just don't want you to sit down and then
Sure.
stand back up again. All right, thank you. Okay.
Lauren, I do have a question for you.
Yes.
How does a building get demolished without, I mean, if there were plans being reviewed by the city for redevelopment, how did the obvious fact that a historic building would be demolished get past staff?
That's a great question. The one I asked as well. And essentially it came down to there are different permitting processes for, one for new construction and one, for the demolition. So, one permit was reviewed and applied for and, met things. So, exactly what fell through the cracks, how it wasn't clear that a demolition permit was required. It's not, and it just seems like through the process fell through the cracks, unfortunately, in this case.
Can we figure out where that crack is and fix it?
It's definitely been raised by, there have been many discussions. This happened in March, I believe, and yeah, a lot of discussions in our whole division, which includes the building safety who's doing the permitting, as well as us in planning. So it has definitely been brought up to address. And it's also some other things pointed out, to other reviewers that, Heritage Preservation didn't review the new build because we wouldn't. I don't get assigned to something like that unless it's in an overlay and subject to design standards for an overlay. But, there are other things were brought up, like there was a pre-application meeting for that project, and pre-application meetings, really should be double checking that we're including heritage preservation. So the Heritage Preservation Officer can have a chance to weigh in and remind everybody up front that a cultural resource study is required for, before demolishing a building that's over 50 years old. There were a few other processy type things that, were brought up to other plan reviewers as well.
Don't they look at like Google Earth to see what the site looks like?
Yes, I mean, I can't explain exactly how this was missed by the applicant or by the city.
Like maybe a checkbox somewhere that, you look to see if something exists there.
Well, we appreciate your follow-up in trying to navigate this and figure out what happened. All right, Lynn, tell us what you found.
Well, first thing I pulled up was the site plan. And you can see that
Sorry, can you make it big?
yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Expand it. So you can see that the building with the red star on it is the subject building. So it was on their site plan. Just to add to that, I'm just yeah, I don't know. I don't know if just people didn't think it was an old building but it doesn't matter, right, for demolition.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes, because
so-
there's other requirements
Yeah.
besides just that.
So it's inadvertent on the property owner's part. They just didn't think they needed it if they got a building permit without having that, I guess. So, I basically was familiar with the building. I've done probably at least half a dozen in La Plaza Vieja over the years. Historic preservation documentation. And whether it was there or not, I've probably found the least on this building as by a long shot than I've ever found. So kind of my conclusion for this building was that it probably was always built as a secondary residence or rental residence. I wasn't really even able to connect it long term through an owner. I looked at ownership records for adjoining properties to try to create some connectivity to just create the ownership history for this property, and it's pretty scant. The other interesting find was the fact that a building very similar to the one that was there shows up shifted to the west slightly on the 1916 Sanford Fire map for Flagstaff, and it's the southernmost extent of the Sanborn maps for 1916 as well, so I couldn't see anything further to the south, but a building shows up there in 1916, and then that building is then a little bit different and shifted to the east where the current building is located on the 1948 revision.
Hey, so can you pull those up just so people online can see them?
I'll pull up the Sanborns.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go. I think I can maybe get. So that's the top one is the 1916. So you can see the dwelling there with the red star is situated pretty much in the south central portion of the lot that later is split over time. This lot that we're looking at is both 405 and 407 West Tucson. The house is addressed as 205 South Park, though, historically. And then we go down to the next. This is the 1948 revision. You can see it's shifted, and it's actually a different structure. It shows a division in the in the property. The demarcation there on the western end of the house is it's roofed differently. The eastern 2/3 of the house has a gable roof over it, and the western third, the back side on the west side, has a hip roof over it. So it's different, but it seems to have been built at the same time. Interestingly, I'm not really sure why it wasn't just one gable roof, center door. I mean, it's 464 square feet, I think, remembering correctly. So yeah, so interestingly, we seem to have had a similarly small building, dwelling there in 1916. That comes down, we get a different building between 1916 and 1948. And nothing in the building. And I talked to a good dear friend of mine who actually lived here for a year or two, who's familiar with construction materials. And she also echoed that there wasn't anything in the house. She echoed the property owner's description of the dimensional lumber, the windows, the doors. It looked to date around 1950. So that would seem to think maybe a later 1940s construction for it. So the earliest material was of 1950, circa 1950. So, yeah, anything else you want to know? I didn't tie it to anybody specific in La Plaza Vieja or in Flagstaff in general. And other than it being really kind of the last house on that southeastern edge of La Plaza Vieja there. Yeah, I basically didn't find it to contribute significantly to the neighborhood.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Yeah, could you scroll that down a little bit and go past Tucson and go towards the north?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, there was 3 of those units built. One of them was the one we're in question. There was another one that was on the in the alleyway between Park and Phoenix. And then the last one was on the corner of Park and Phoenix and was owned by Ford McElroy, a historian here in town, if anybody's familiar with it. So there was 3 of these, and I believe these 3 units were all identical, and they were built before my time, put it that way. And it's been a long time.
Interesting.
But I think it was an attempt to affordable housing in those years. They were identical.
Right.
They were for the working class. Like I say, Mr. McElroy lived in the one on on Phoenix and Park. The one in the alleyway on between Tucson and Phoenix, sad to say, a man by the name of George burned up in that one. And so this was the last of those 3 units. So there's some historical significance to these buildings. It's a shame that we weren't able to document more on it.
That's good information. Mr. Dominguez, who did you say you thought the builder was?
I don't know who the builder was.
Oh, okay.
The owner of the one on the
owner.
corner on Phoenix and Tucson was Mr. Ford McElroy. And you guys might remember him. He used to hang out at the old Greyhound bus depot, had the handlebar mustache, and he was a great historian. Him and his mom lived in that house. The funny story about that house, he wanted to waterproof it and he painted it with tar. It was black. So
Wow.
just to give you some history on that one, but they were identical.
Jesse, maybe you can speak to this. I understood that they had come with the train. When I look at that siding, it's much older than the 50s. It's like 1890s maybe, but I heard there were a lot of these little houses that came into Flagstaff on the train. They unloaded them for the workers and some stayed. Have you ever heard that?
I've never heard that. I know that the section house was right on the corner right by the underpass where the railroad workers lived, and that got demolished also. A lot of families grew up there that worked for the railroad. It was the section house. Uh, every so many, I guess, miles, they had to have somebody to help maintain the trains.
I wonder if the dimensions would fit on a train car. Otherwise, I can't figure out how that could be confirmed, but they're so small that I
Yeah.
wonder if they could have fit on a train car.
No, it makes sense, especially with Commissioner Dominguez saying there were 3, right, just in this neighborhood that were identical. Yeah, and I mean, I definitely was hoping to find some, just railroad worker connection, if not with, a specific person, at least the railroad, that they own it or somebody affiliated with the railroad at some time. And that kind of made more sense if this were the 1916 or earlier house we were talking about, but that's when this became just more interesting in a different way, that this was probably constructed in the 40s or transplanted in the, but the materials just weren't of that 1916 20s era.
Did you do this before or after it was demolished, this report?
After.
So there could have been a lot of hints in the walls,
Yeah.
how
and
things were
that's-
constructed and paper in the walls.
And that's where I had to rely on, the property owners describing what was there when they got in, because they did get into the walls, and I think did plumbing repair or something, or fix, yeah. And
Sorry, if you want to address the commission, you have to come up to a mic because people online can't hear you from a couple seats back. Sorry. But you're welcome to, as the property owner, if you can answer, please come forward.
do you want to speak to this? Yeah. Chris, yeah.
So, can you hear me there? So in this picture, we had to do some plumbing repairs. And this is where, like I said, these are all dimensional. This isn't, you know, I don't know, circa, it's not the full dimensional lumber that used to come out of the sawmill. This is newer material. There was PEX piping in the wall. We didn't find, like, this is all sheetrock, so there wasn't any board and plaster on there. So that's why when Lynn was asking me what the materials were, we did have this picture that I shared with her, and what I found. Like I said, we've done some older remodeling. Like you said, you'll tear into walls and you'll find the old newspapers and stuff like that, or old wallpaper made out of cloth on there. And this particular one, like I said, this is what we found. It was all the dimensional lumber and newer materials.
I would bet that plumbing was added after it was built.
Probably at some point it was probably added, and that's like Lynn and I were talking, is at some point it must have been rebuilt at some point. Like I don't know when, of course, but that's what we were finding. So hopefully that's helpful.
I've got one question. Is the big pine tree still back there?
The big pine tree is still back there.
I used to climb that pine tree. And the reason I asked that is there was a young man that lived there, and his name was Hal Malcolm, and he broke every window on that house. So that's why I know the history of this house. And you run in the front door and come out the back door, right straight through. So, I mean, that's the way they
Right,
build them.
right.
And so, I mean, it's sort of neat, that history that's there. But I know it was remodeled many times.
Gotcha.
And there was many college students that lived in that home.
Right, right.
Other questions from commission? I just had one little quibble with the report, and this is probably just because I've been editing other people's work far too much this semester. But I too, like Duffy, was confused as to the timeline of when this was built. And I think especially the use of the present tense made it sound like you had looked at the building and were describing it as it existed while you were writing the report, which obviously is not the case as it was demolished. That doesn't necessarily make your findings any less credible or accurate, but it just read more like you were writing the report while looking at the building
Yeah.
rather than
'Cause
afterwards.
I
And
was
I
trying
think,
to evaluate.
yeah,
it
and
that
I
way.
think just either changing the tense or just putting a addendum up at the top that just sort of explains the
Okay.
timeline of when you got to it, I think would help just sort of ground in, that you're working from pictures and from oral histories rather than actual
Okay.
looking at the building.
I have one more.
Yes, of course.
I just like to compliment the builder. They're building some really nice units there. It's definitely a plus for the neighborhood. Uh, I just have a problem that the city, and I have this problem with the city, not the owner, is that they didn't catch it. I mean, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. And yet it's the same department. And maybe I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I think there has to be a check and balance somewhere. I mean, we have a lot of old houses and buildings that have gone bye-bye because, oh, too bad. I'm sorry. It just doesn't, I mean, why are we here for? We're trying to preserve a little bit of what history that's left. So I think we need to make sure that there's a check and balance. And Lauren, I know you said we've discussions. Well, I haven't been to any of those discussions, so I don't know what's happened. But I think there has to be some action. There has to be a check mark. There has to be something says, whoa, 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 wait a minute. How old is this building? I mean, we wouldn't do this to, say the Reardon House, would we? Or even the one on the corner, the old sawmill payroll house. That's where my dad used to get his paycheck from. I mean, that would send off all kinds of flags and wheel bells and whistles. So I guess I'm just a little frustrated that we're putting the cart in front of the horse.
No, I feel that frustration too, because increasingly we'll get these reports and, the setting is lost, and it's because these buildings have been torn down. And so it becomes harder to justify these homes as having integrity because they keep losing the integrity when we lose the buildings. And that doesn't mean that we have to save every single building, but it does mean that we need to think about the value of the sort of larger picture.
Ditto.
Could I ask a question? Commissioner Dominguez, do you mind me adding when I'm going to change the report to address the tensing comments and just the fact that I'm trying to do it in the present from something that no longer exists, and while I'm in there, I'd like to add the information you shared today.
You're more than welcome, and
Okay.
you can pick my brains, and then you better
I'd
hurry
like
because
to.
it's getting lost,
Okay.
just like the houses.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's we want to preserve what we do have,
Yeah.
and at least document what we have.
Well,
I mean,
that's
again, like I don't blame the owner or the builders. They're doing a fantastic job with the new replacement units that are going in there. They look really nice.
yeah.
But there's just still that little bit of crawl in me that says, "Oh man, we lost that beautiful little old bungalow
Right.
that
Right.
was built for a certain reason." I mean, I'd like to know more about it, to tell you the truth.
Sure.
I just took it for granted that it'd be there forever, and it's not.
Well, you're prompting me to do a little more digging, so I'm happy to do that and try and put it into context, because I also like Commissioner Westenheimer's idea that maybe they came in on trains and, maybe this is similar dimensions to what was there before and maybe just built later, but they're building it in the same single person bungalow style.
Ask Joe Meehan too. Do you know Joe Meehan?
Yeah.
Talk to Joe.
I would also research Mr. Ford McElroy, because he had the same identical home, and him and his mother lived in that house, and he owned that whole half a block. And the reason I remember him is, like I say, he was a historian and cowboy that walked downtown every day, and you'd see him walking, and finally one day he didn't. But anyways, he also owned deuce and a halves. He had all this Army military stuff. So I know there's a lot of history. If you can find a little bit about him,
Okay.
we might be able to find who built those homes.
Okay.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
He may have worked at the depot, so
Oh,
look in Arizona's Wartown, see if John mentions him.
thank you.
Other questions from commission? All right. Well, again, thank you, Lynn, for recording the building and what we know about it. All right. Any further discussion or questions, or are we ready for motions? It sounds like Lynn is already poised to add to the report. Should we include that in the motion?
If that's what the commission is asking for, is for her to make changes to the report, then
Okay.
I would move to approve and then list the specific
Okay.
changes that you would like her to make. And then also specify whether or not that can be submitted to me and approved by me, or if you request it to come back to the commission.
Well, so far I've heard, and based on what Lynn has mentioned, that she would like to include Jesse's remarks and potentially some further investigation into Ford McElroy. I mean, if the buildings are the same, there might be some information on it there. And then just a note that the building was assessed after it was already demolished. Was there anything else? I think we're the two bigger things that we had discussed and Lynn had mentioned. Yeah.
I'd like to go ahead and make that motion.
Oh,
I mean, it's let's just get it done with the additions of whatever other findings they have, and make sure that we document anything and everything that is available to us at this point.
I think that's a pretty vague motion. I don't know if that's gonna, and I don't think you said I move.
Yeah, I think we need to have the motion format of I move to, and then approve the phase 1 culture resource study with the requested changes and subject to the approval of the Heritage
Oh, yeah.
Preservation Officer.
I am fine with you guys. Those seem like pretty reasonable. I don't think that needs to come back to us. I think those seem like, but if, Lynn finds anything cool, I'd like to know about it. But, yes,
I'd like to add a mitigation to it.
don't
we
know
do
that
that?
we can. You had mentioned mitigation, Lauren. What is the?
Mitigation is for resources that were determined to be significant. So therefore, there would be a major impact under the code. So this was not in the report. So therefore, it's not a situation in which mitigation would be proposed. And those are the findings in this report. So if you don't agree with the findings, then that would be another conversation for the commission to have.
Didn't those reports say, even the most recent one, that there was some significant, I didn't print that.
The inventory forms recommended that it was eligible, but this report contradicts those, and with further study recommends that it is not eligible for the Flagstaff or National Register, and it is not a significant property, and therefore no mitigation is needed.
You can disagree with the report. That is part of our power here.
My mitigation request was going to be making the report available to the public.
I mean, I think it is. It's attached to this agenda, right? So it's already available to the public.
But there's no way for people to know when it was discussed and where to find it. And that's the challenge, is that if these reports are hidden in agendas, someone who walked into the public library who wanted to know something couldn't find it.
Yeah, but I don't think you can put it on staff to create a library. That's new resources that they don't have the time or budget for. If you want to distribute it, I think you are allowed to do that because it is publicly available and you can let people know. But I don't think we can require the library have space to print these and store them. It would be great, like in a wonderful ideal world, we would have just a beautiful library of these things available, but I just don't think that's. Sorry, Sarah, you were going to say something.
Oh, you made my point. I was just going to say that's not in our current program of work. And so that's, I think that is a request not tied to this particular application. That's tied to a comment that you've made previously about wanting the staff to be able to do that. And I think we've answered that question a couple of times.
I will keep asking.
You can keep asking and we'll just keep saying we do not have resources right now to do that.
So do you want me to take back my motion?
I don't think it was a motion, but could Duffy just create a website called like flagstaffreports.com and post these on there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think that if that is something that you want, then that is something, unfortunately, I think you're just going to have to undertake on your own.
And I do want to point out, just for a public education point, because it's here, is that when you go to the agendas webpage for the city, it is searchable. All these agendas, you could put in an address like this one, and it would pull up any agenda on any commission or council that discuss that address. And that is how planners use that website all the time to pull up older motions or staff reports. And send them to people for review. So it is searchable. It's not like it just lives there and you have to know what month it is. You can actually search the content of all the agendas.
And I just add that I am the repository. So if anyone is doing research, that's currently how it works, is they can, without having to search the website, of a specific address. If they were just doing research on Tucson and Park, they could ask me, what else has been done, and I can share the reports with them.
All right, Commissioner Dominguez, do you want to make an official motion?
Okay, I'd like to make an official motion to accept the Phase 1 Cultural Resource Study on 205 South Park.
With the
additional comments, correct? If
he has to list them out, correct?
Yeah, you have to say with the condition that the following changes are made. It's okay. We can coach through motions. We're good. This is your first complicated one. Thank you.
With the additional comments that as what future findings come with it.
And is it acceptable for the Heritage Preservation Officer to review those changes, or do they need to come back to the commission as the last part?
Definitely.
Okay. Which parts most definitely? Sorry, I know I have to
say and
with the preservation person to do it.
I know it takes practice. Thank you.
Is that good? All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Dominguez. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
And a second from Commissioner Bertram. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you so much. All right, that concludes our public hearing items. We will now move on to general business, starting with the two-spot logging train discussion.
All right, thank you. And I have a few other City of Flagstaff staff members with me, both in person and online. Jana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, greetings, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today. My name is Jana Weldon. I'm the Beautification Arts and Sciences Program Manager. And also with me today is our collections, beautification, and public art project administrator, Corey Woodall, who's going to make the presentation today. I just wanted to introduce because I just wanted to say that Council Member Spence brought a couple of these items to our attention, and this is a result of our investigation along with Lauren Clementino. And with that, I will turn it over to Corey.
Okay. So as Jana mentioned, a council member had some suggestions for the current conditions of the two-spot logging train. The train is actually in the collection of Beautification Arts and Sciences, which is why I'm here presenting with Lauren to get your guidance, your opinions, and your thoughts on what you think the best steps forward for the conservation of this train would be. So first of all, I'm just going to go over the historic background of that train, its addition to the National Register of Historic Places, its history here in the city of Flagstaff, previous treatments that the train has undergone, and then its current condition and those suggestions being made. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the history of two-spot, but for the sake of this conversation, it seems prudent to just review the history of the train. It was built in 1911 and was acquired by AL&T Lumber Company in 1917, where it served the local lumber industry. AL&T operated the train through 1941, and ownership changed several times after that. The last owner was the Stone Forest Company, who continued to use the train until its retirement in 1966. It remained in the Stone Forest Company's possession until its sale in 1995, bringing it to the collection of the city. The train is significant as it's one of 2 local logging trains to survive the scrap needs of World War II, and all of its service remained in the Flagstaff region. That other significant train is over by the Pioneer Museum. Two-spot got its name from the stories of train crewmen who hung water bags from the window of the engine car, which through friction scraped away the number 5, leaving the number 2 and a spot behind. The tender attached to the locomotive is not original, but it is of historic vintage. The Stone Forest Company swapped the original tender car for a slope-back switcher that gave the brakemen greater visibility sometime after 1952. The age of the log carrier is not known. From at least 1966 to the present, the log carrier has been attached to the locomotive. So in 1999, the train, its tender car, and the log carrier were added to the National Register of Historic Places. Most of the information being shared with you in this presentation is from the documentation from that application, as well as from archived city staff files. The registration paperwork contains exhaustive detail of the known history of the train up until 1999. If you're interested, we are happy to share this information with you. It's readily available online. So just before 1995, a group of Flagstaff residents, led by an individual named Malcolm Mackey, raised funds to purchase and restore the train and its tender car. The train was officially sold to the city in 1995 for $45,000. Lauren, did you want to say anything else about the acquisition of the train by the city?
There is some additional, oral history and some written history by Malcolm Mackey, who was also involved in the acquisition of the train at the Pioneer Museum and has written, articles and things over time. And, I wasn't there for the deal, but essentially the train, the story goes that the train was about to be sold to someone in Oregon, and the, forest industries didn't have a great relationship with the city at the time. And essentially, this group of local residents had to come up with the money to make the deal happen. So they purchased the train basically to do it within the very limited amount of time that they were, like, we're shipping it to Oregon unless you pony up the money by this date. So they did, and then they turned around and sold it to the city. So there's we have the purchase agreement was drafted by one of these men, a local lawyer, kind of facilitating the wholesale. So it's a neat local story.
Thank you.
There's an extra letter at the end of Malcolm's name. B at the end of
Oh.
Malcolm.
Good to know. Thank you. All right. So just going to some of the previous treatments that this train has already received. In 1950, a new firebox was installed when the train was still operational. Circa 1951, the engine was renumbered as 2, the number it retained until its retirement. The engine has since been repainted with its original AL&T roster number of 25. The exact date of this restoration is unknown, but Lauren Clementino's research shows that the logging train had already undergone this restoration prior to the city acquiring it in 1995. In 1999, lead-based paint was scraped from the cab and reachable asbestos was removed. There is still some asbestos remaining in parts of the train, but it is inaccessible and should remain undisturbed. In 2003, a full lead-based paint abatement and repainting of the train engine and tender car was performed. More details of that painting are on file. In 2009, the train was again repainted. Former Historic Preservation Officer Carl Eberhardt wrote that this effort was primarily to stabilize the train by halting the deterioration process to the greatest possible degree and to buy time until a preservation process could be initiated. Secondarily, the work of this project, the repainting, will restore the current general appearance so that the train remains attractive and a valued feature within the downtown of Flagstaff. The logos and identifying signage were painted on at the time of the last overall painting project, which would have been 2003. They appear to be recreations from historic photographs. The log carrier has not been repainted. So this is the current condition and one of the conservation issues that we are going to be discussing today. And that is the lumber that is in the back of the log carrier. The lumber itself obviously is not a historic object. It is a prop that has been added there to provide a visual understanding of the functionality of the car. So Councilmember Spence has suggested that we replace the decaying logs with new timber. Pros of doing this, of course, is a strong visual link to the historic function of the train, and we could treat those logs to help slow the decay. Cons of doing this, the weight of the logs could burden the structural integrity of the logging car, reducing its longevity. I have not observed any of that damage to the train at this point. I'm not a train conservator. I work with fine arts, mostly public art, but coming from a conservation standpoint, any amount of weight added to an object is going to eventually cause some damage to that object. So just something to consider. The logs too, even being treated, will need to be replaced regularly, so it'll be an ongoing maintenance need for the train. An alternate solution to this would be to replace the logs in fewer quantity than is currently there to still give that visual communication, but reduce the weight impact on the train. The second issue is that the original 1911-25, as part of earlier restoration efforts, is what is on the train today. It has been suggested that we remove that 5 to reflect the history of the two-spot name. Pros, again, visually reflects the utilitarian wear and tear of the train over the years. But the cons are that if we mimic the rubbing out of the 5, it could damage the earlier restoration efforts. and painting over the 5 may result in a poor color match, and of course is not historically accurate to how the 5 was removed in the first place. And the final suggestion was that we hang water bags from the train window to illustrate how Two-Spot got its name. Another strong visual educational impact. But if a water bag was put on the train 24/7, exposed to the elements over time, it would rub against the train and damage the paint as it had in the past. Another issue would be sourcing historically accurate water carriers would be something that staff would need to research. The image I have here is just a placeholder. An alternate suggestion would be if we can source those historic water bags, that we would hang them from a train window, illustrating how Two-Spot got its name at special events only and not on a 24/7 basis. So at this point, do you have something to add, Lauren? Okay, at this point, we'd just like you to discuss these suggestions and provide some guidance on how you might like to see us moving forward in the treatment of Two-Spot train.
And yeah, we're happy to answer questions, give our 2 cents if you're interested in staff recommendations.
I had a question about the lumber on the
Mhm.
train. Are there risks to damaging any part of the train if you're removing that old lumber and replacing it with the newer lumber? Is that a concern that you guys were
Yeah,
thinking?
the weight essentially is the
Yeah.
concern. Is that it's
The weight and any work done on the train, removing those logs is going to require rigging, so there's risk that that rigging might scratch the train or collapse or some, all sorts of things could happen, right? So anytime you do something, there is a level of risk. So that's something to consider as well.
Commissioner Horn.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Do you have any photos that show logs in a carrier, and do you have photos that show what the train looked like when the 5 had been rubbed off of the engine? I'm just thinking of other ways to convey that without actually affecting the train.
Sure. So we have photos of I think there was one earlier, showing the water bag, although at that point it had already been repainted to the 2. But we do have some historic photos showing the water bag over the 5. We don't have any photos showing the rubbing, which would be one of my professional concerns with trying to recreate it. Is generally if you were trying to restore something to a certain period of time in the period of significance, you're going to do that based off of the evidence you have available, and we don't have any in this case. So we would have to kind of do the best we could, which is, so personally, I wouldn't be in support of that. That's my professional opinion. The current restoration, to the 2.5 is still, still restores it to a period, part of its period of significance. There's nothing wrong with the current restoration, in my opinion. It was listed in the National Register with the current numbering, so it was deemed to have sufficient integrity, obviously, at that point to do that. But this log carrier was not the one historically associated with the train. So I don't think we actually have any, we acquired it later. I don't think we have any historic photos specifically of this log carrier. I guess
I meant just a log carrier generally, just to convey how they were used.
Right.
Thinking, I mean, it's not as visually striking as actually having it there, but it could be an alternative to have a sign that shared some of that, sort of life history of the engine, rather than trying to depict everything on on the train itself.
And there is an interpretive sign in front of it that does explain the 2-spot numbering history.
Okay.
And I forget exactly the wording, if it explains what exactly it says about the lumber. I've got a photo I can pull up and read it in a second. But thank you, Commissioner Horn, for your suggestion.
It seems like it would be risky to try to get rid of the 5. Like it would almost be not worth the effort, and you could potentially damage it, make it worse.
Correct. That would be my opinion. I mean, I would also be afraid, right, if you're exposing it to the elements, or you're going to introduce rust or or other damage. Is that why the train was repainted in the first place? Was because there were those things. Unfortunately, we don't have those records, but I professionally agree with that. Commissioner Horn?
Yeah, I just want to weigh in, and I think trying to remove the 5 when we don't know what, you don't know what it even looked like with it removed, I think is just a guessing game and would just, could be providing a false history of what it actually looked like.
Commissioner Dominguez, you had your hand up.
Yes, I would say go ahead and replace the logs. I mean, that's what the carrier does, right? And I don't think you're going to hurt it. It's not going anywhere. I think just somebody's got to be careful with it. I don't know if you're going to have any sawmill people around anymore. And I do have history about that train. I actually seen that train moving down by the dome in 1968. So I don't know. I mean, it was still running in 68. It crossed right there at the bottom of Larry Street, and you had to stop and wait for it to go across going into the sawmill. Sylvan Tyler was one of the engineers, and Mr. Leon Gomez was the oiler. So I knew those two guys, and they worked on that piece of equipment. But getting back to the number 5, leave it. I would say just leave it. The story's there. Everybody knows why old 2 Spot was there. And Sylvan Tyler drank water out of that water bag you're talking about. Good idea to have that water bag so that people know what you're talking. Who knows what a water bag is? Think about it. That's history. So that way, at least you have it, and it's a show and tell thing. Thank you.
I'll just add that we don't have a water bag right now. What I pictured here is just something I pulled off the internet as to illustrate for the conversation. So if we were to acquire something, it would require research and then housing and programming for it to go out on the train.
And those are hard to find, especially that was really popular on Route 66, and that's happening next year, the 100-year anniversary. So if you could find one of those, good luck. Get it. It's probably going to be expensive, though.
Several of them appear to depict very antiquated Native American imagery. So that might be on eBay. So that might be something to consider as well.
I'd like to just review, this came about because Council Member Spence felt the logs should be replaced. Is that correct?
Yes, so all 3 of the points for discussion were brought up by Council Member Spence, and so we were looking for guidance from the Historic Preservation Commission on how to proceed.
I would say don't remove the 5. And the water bag, if who's going to be available to put it there for special events. But in terms of the logs, I don't have a clear picture of their condition. I understand about the weight. I don't know that it's yet caused a problem, but metal things do deteriorate. But one question I have is that it might be hard to find logs of the dimension that those are. And maybe if you're worried about the weight, remove the worst and leave the others.
Is it something where you would try to work with the Coconino National Forest to get local logs?
Yeah, we haven't really gotten that far in the sourcing of the lumber at this point, but that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, just part of that problem is all the old growth was cut down, and so the trees are a lot smaller than they used to be, and so. Yes, sorry.
Okay. Commissioner Dell, I think that that one of the partners we might look at too is the fire department, because they regularly do fire treatments on private property, and sometimes that can mean taking down bigger trees that might be, have root rot or something that allows them to be cut down because they're a hazard tree. And so we could, it's not known how much it would cost, but if we would probably look to be as, careful as possible in finding something if we were to go that route. And it is true that they're decaying. The Lauren's got the plaque pulled up, and it's a very simple plaque. So something maybe even not on the list yet is if we did take them out or we left them as is, you could put a new interpretive sign there that has images and is a better, more modern representation. This one was published, what year was it, Lauren?
June 1999. And I believe that was Commissioner Horn's suggestion was going with updated photos. And to confirm, Commissioner Horn, the plaque does not, it doesn't have any photos at all, but it also doesn't, it just speaks to the two-spot naming and not specifically to the log carrier.
So a water bag image could be added if the plaque were modified or a second one added.
Or a picture of it holding logs, so you don't need to put logs on it. But I don't know, people come and take their photo by that train all the time. I think part of that is like, look at this logging town I'm in. There are trees and snow in Arizona. Yeah, so it sounds like we as a commission agree to leave with the assessment to leave the 25 as it is, with some more mixed ideas about the logs and the water bags.
I think we don't know enough, like Duffy said, about as far as the logs, maybe when you get farther down the road and you have more of a definitive idea of how it would work with the logs, removing them versus keeping them, you know, the risk, cost, benefit, then we would probably lean one way or the other on those. So.
Thank you.
Commissioner Horn.
Yeah, I was just going to comment about the logs. Perhaps you could get with somebody who does there's a lot of old train buffs out there and people that specialize that could maybe help understand like what the threats are of adding more weight, because presumably if there's cut green trees, they're going to weigh more than those that are dried out that are on there anyway, and just how much damage it would do, if any, to replace those and have heavier logs on there.
And really that picture right there shows that it's only got a few logs. In the olden days, that thing would be maybe twice as high. So that's already been taken into consideration. So it looks like you have maybe 3 or 4 logs, maybe 5 at the most.
Looks like
How many?
5 total.
5. So maybe put 4. I don't know. Just a thought.
It is only visible from, one side of the sidewalk there. It's not in the round. So if there's, some way to prop up just a couple of the logs, perhaps that's another. Then you have an issue of it being off balance. So a lot to consider.
Speaking to Amy's point about talking to other people, you could get in touch with Al Richmond, he's over in Williams. He runs will one day be the Arizona Railroad Heritage Park, and he owns like 10 trains. Like all the trains outside the Grand Canyon Railway are his trains. And so he does a lot of work with conserving and displaying trains. Like he's going to build like a huge roundhouse to like just have people come and stand on trains someday. I don't know. He's also like 80 something. So anyway, he might be a good source if you're just looking for general train information, and he's just over in Williams. I can get you his. And he loves talking about trains. And then the Grand Canyon Railway owns some vintage trains as well that they sometimes have people ride in. So,
and I will add, I did reach out to SHPO for an opinion, and they didn't provide a specific opinion on direction, but just also suggested we could reach out to the 2 big historic train parks in Phoenix, in Scottsdale and Chandler, and get their opinion as well. They all, I think, would be good resources if we went with trying to source a historic water bag.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your input.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Jana.
All right, that was fun. We will now move on to item 7B, training on review process for development in a historic overlay zone.
All right, thank you. So this, just to recap, the last couple meetings we've been talking about, training requests, and then we talked last time about, okay, we've all reviewed all the existing training material. What do we still want to talk more about? And one of them was specifically going through like the certificates, the process for review, in one of the overlays? What are the differences between the certificates? How does all that work? So that is what we're here to do tonight. So Sarah and I are of course here, and then we're joined by Ariana Urban, our CLG coordinator with the State Historic Preservation Office, who can also answer some questions. And so really we're, gonna go through a lot of this is gonna be direct from the code. And then, but we can stop and take questions, kind of find out exactly where we need to have more discussion. All right, so what is the code? So our Heritage Preservation Code 103030 is in the Flagstaff zoning code. So this is our local ordinance, covering historic archaeological resources and that may be affected by public and private development within the city of Flagstaff. And establishing a local ordinance is one of our requirements, or was one of our requirements, to become a certified local government in our agreement with SHPO. It's also the legal basis for the commission and for my authority in the code. And we've talked about this before, but the commission has a quasi-judicial authority and is not merely an advisory commission. And that is a different structure than a lot of the other commissions in the city, because you do have public hearing items that you do approve, and you have to interpret the Heritage Preservation Code to make those decisions. And that is, of course, also why, we'll never mind. We'll get into that later, but just don't want to skip ahead. Okay. And that is, of course, the Museum Club and the Orpheum. Just had to throw some pictures in where we could. Okay, so what is in 103030? So I know you've all read it. And we talk about it all the time, but these are, the specific sections, the purpose, applicability, general provisions, how to designate a landmark property individually or a historic overlay zone. Culture resources, which is the section of the code we were just talking about with Lynn Neal's phase 1 cultural resource study. And then the section we're going to spend the most time in tonight is development of a landmark property and property within a historic overlay zone. And then the end of the code is violations and enforcement and what the appeal process is for our decisions. Any questions so far? No. All right, so one other training request that we talked about last time was having someone come in and talk about different types of applications that we refer to, as we go back and forth with the different types of studies and the different types of certificates. And we're hoping to do that in October. I've talked to our current planning manager who is interested in coming and doing a presentation on specifically the types of development applications that current planning reviews, such as the concept plan and site plan. She is unable to be here tonight, but that's okay. We'd be good to break things up into multiple training sessions. So hopefully that will be coming next month, but just to kind of go over some things now, so we have a little bit of a background for having other discussion. So some common things that you see, first, building permit, that's very, very general. Just about everything that you see is gonna have a building permit at some point in the process. So, required for all new construction and additions. And then a sign permit, this you see a lot in the downtown overlay, specifically with the certificates of no effect for approvals of new and replacement signs often, and I believe there's probably some later in the agenda. So those often you're going to see my historic preservation review number, and then they also have a sign permit number assigned to them as well. And so, both of those I regularly get assigned to. The sign permits, specifically in that section we were just talking about, when there's design guidelines for signs, such as in the downtown overlay. And then building permits, usually I should get assigned to everything involving structures over 50 years old, at least that's on the exterior of the property, because interior only alterations are exempt from Heritage Preservation Code. Although I actually get assigned to a lot of those as well, which is fine. I don't mind getting assigned to them and then, noting that they don't actually need my review. So that, is often with both of those, the nexus for making the reviews and the cultural resource study requirements. So, I'm getting assigned, let's say, a demolition permit for a building that's over 50 years old. If I would get assigned to the demolition permit, and then I would say, here's the code requirement, you're going to need to do a cultural resource study. And then, that's how eventually it'll wind its way back to you. Yes, Commissioner Westheimer. And this, so not every project requires a concept plan or a site plan.
This is Commissioner Horn. I'm really sorry, I didn't hear Commissioner Westheimer's question. Could you repeat
Sure.
it?
Her question was there a site plan for 205 South Park? And and at that point, it should have depicted that there was a building to be demolished. And in that case, just for simple residential construction, no. And again, in our training next month, we can go more in depth on exactly what triggers a concept plan and a site plan, but for that, it did not. As was shown earlier, it was shown on the building plans that came in for the building permit. So that different, but again, that was the building permit for the new construction, not the separate demolition permit. But yeah, so skipping down to concept plan, site plan. So we talk a lot about this, especially with, larger projects, commercial projects. And so, ones we've talked about recently do include the 19 West Birch, a lot of questions about that. It is still in the concept plan phase, but you also, let's see, the 15 North Park is one that the commission reviewed when it was in site plan. Also the 603 West Birch, the commission reviewed at the site plan. And so for our purposes today, the main thing to know is that the concept plan, very general, there's no elevations. There's nothing that's going to show us like what it's really going to look like, what the materials are going to be, whether or not it meets the design standards for the overlay. But then the site plan is where we start getting a lot more of that information. So as Commissioner Westheimer read the graphic depiction of features and I should note, all of these are the code definitions for all of these things as well. And so generally the process would be, and we talked about this quite a bit, so apologies for repeating, but generally the concept plan comes in first. That is, comments are sent back, comments are addressed, it's approved by the city, then it comes back in for a site plan. And again, reviewed by the city, comments are sent back. And then the way that per the request of the commission based on past projects, a certificate of appropriateness is brought to the commission after the applicant has received that first round of site plan comments from the city. And that's because it's not just comments for heritage preservation, it's for fire, stormwater, building safety, all of the other reviewers who are going to have input that may change the design. So get all of the big things, they incorporate them. And then once the design is a little farther along, and it also gives me a first chance to review it and say, hey, here are all of the things that, don't meet the design standards. And then, ask for those comments to be addressed. And with both of these, I am at it as a reviewer. and can provide input on, hey, this isn't an overlay. You need this type of certificate. You know, this is how you apply for a certificate. This is the application and the submission schedule and the meeting schedule for the Heritage Preservation Commission. Anything that you want to add to any of that, Sarah, on the applications?
Yeah, I'd just say the practice of how a site plan review is done by Heritage Preservation has varied over time. It's not like a part of the code. It's more like a business practice.
Right, because
so Carl did it very differently than the way Mark and I did it when we started with having Heritage Preservation Review in our program. And then last year with the 15 North Park case, planning often tries to be very flexible with applicants. We try and like meet them where they are and figure out how to be collaborative and not rigid in how we structure a review, as long as we're meeting all the requirements before an approval is issued. You know, sometimes we do work with them in different settings or have meetings, things like that. But with site plan, since last July, our position has been we no longer bring any graphics or certificates of appropriateness to this commission until a first site plan review has been completed and they've received that full suite of first round comments. Because what we found was when someone brought drawings to the commission at concept plan, or sometimes they'd even try it way before they'd even gotten concept plan comments, the comments would be significant when they got into those steps and it would totally alter their design. And that would send them back to the commission a second time. And there are pros and cons to that business practice side of the approach. The real requirement is that that certificate has to be approved before the site plan can be approved. And how early or how many times they're reviewed is more on the business practice side of things. So that can be informal and it can change over time. So I think maybe that's worth mentioning, is that there's a lot of code and then staff has kind of business practices that we do and that also evolve. Like for instance, the state has changed some of the requirements for our timing and how quickly we have to review cases. Which is also why we've changed some of those things over time. So there's a lot of pieces to that site plan part that Alex and the current planning staff will be able to get into a lot of detail on. But I want to be clear, like Lauren's saying, here's our processes. All of these have a foundation in code, but there is some like flexibility in business practices. Staff's experience is that bringing a design to the commission too early has led to multiple reviews of a design, and also a lot of extra time and money for the applicant that could have been resolved by them waiting to get those first comments. Like if you've got an easement on your property, but they bring you a drawing that shows that being covered by a building, they may not know that fully until site plan when that full review is happening. So just bear that in mind. Like it is, every step in this process kind of brings new information and more detail. That's really how you think of it, is that from a concept permit to issued building permits, the details are being added at every step and being reviewed. Is that a good add?
Yeah. So do we have any questions on this? And again, we can go over it more with our current planning manager, Commissioner Westheimer.
I do have a comment. When things come to us and we get the information the Thursday or the Friday prior to a Wednesday meeting, it doesn't give us that much time to think about stuff or to get down there to look at it or all of that. So I'm just hearing I'm hearing about your business practice and your experiences, but that can make it hard for us to come up with our comments in a timely manner. So I think there's a timing issue that is very challenging for the commission.
Commissioner Westheimer, we do always try and get you the packet as early as possible. Like we're definitely working within a timeline, but basically the legislation tries to get staff to do these reviews as quickly as possible.
My
And
point,
that does compress some things. But also, I don't know if this is a comfort or adds to your concern, but you get the same amount of time to review the packets for HPC as the Planning and Zoning Commission gets for entire rezoning cases. So it's generally about the same amount of time.
that makes it very hard for people to do a good job. So I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that it makes it very hard to think about and make decisions that you'll be happy with quickly.
So I'm going on to the next slide here. So we've talked about this a lot, but again, there's sort of two parallel review paths that also overlap in our code. And so just to go into it a little bit more. So, you know, the first question is an application comes in for development. And so does it involve a listed property, undeveloped land, or structures over 50 years old? If the answer is yes, then it triggers the cultural resources section of our code. There are some specific exemptions listed there, which we don't need to go into all of those in detail. But for the most part, you know, if a property is already listed, you know, in the Flagstaff Register, Arizona Register, National Register, it's undeveloped and, you know, would be a good candidate for doing an archaeological survey, or it involves a structure over 50 years old. That's when the cultural resource code process is triggered, and that's where all of the study and mitigation requirements and language live. But tonight, we're more specifically talking about the overlays. So then the second question is it in the downtown town site or the overall landmark overlay? And if the answer to that is yes, then it also follows the development of a landmark property and property within a historic overlay zone. And all of the, just clarification, I'm sure you all know this, but so we have the two historic overlay zones, the downtown and the town site. Those are the two existing historic overlay zones that we have. We do have a few individual properties that are individual landmarks, and they're in a floating overlay zone. So here is the map. So you can see the purple hatch mark is the downtown overlay zone. The blue hatch mark is the town site, and the brown is the individually landmark properties. So you can see Picture Canyon, the Museum of Northern Arizona. There's a few more downtown that are more difficult to make out individually, but that is the map. And then there's also a layer for the National Register districts. Yes, Commissioner Westheimer.
Thank you. What is the brown rectangle past M&A on Schultz? I guess that's Schultz Road to the right. What is
Yes.
that?
Do you want to?
You want to do it or me?
You go up for it.
Oh, it is the property that we often call the Schultz Y. It was in an archaeological site, essentially like a historic archaeological site. When the museum fire came through, NRCS and the city did emergency Section 106 consultation and cleared all that site for demolition. With a visit to the HPC, we actually had a special meeting just to review that finding and basically say, we are going to permit, you know, completely altering the site for catchment basins in order to, you know, save the rest of the community. So that was it's still listed as a landmark overlay. So if anything were found, which I don't think they would be at this point, but we did like test digging out there and things like that maybe would not have occurred if it hadn't have been a landmark overlay at the time. But yeah, it was in a different condition when it was designated, and we just haven't repealed the ordinance that zoned it as landmark. We could, it's just that's also like a staff project, right? So do we have time for it? Is it necessary? Has been kind of on the list. If we were cleaning up some other zoning code things, sometimes that's the kind of thing we ask the zoning code manager to put in a related amendment if she has any cleanup to
Maybe
do. But
next time we add a new one, we'll clean up.
we
the
can also
existing
take this one out.
And then the other thing I would note is you'll see the overlays don't have to follow district boundaries. The downtown overlay has a portion of the Railroad Addition Historic District in it, but not all of it. And then much of it is outside of the district. And then the town site includes almost all of the town site historic district and then a little bit more. So we're going to focus tonight on the development review, but if you really want to dig into the code and look at the requirements for becoming a landmark property or being designated as a historic overlay zone, the requirements are that a majority of the properties are deemed to be significant, and then a majority of the property owners sign the petition for the application to the city. So, so in the case of the downtown overlay, so it just met the 50% requirement based on the existing inventories and information that was known about the buildings in the area. Many of them have been inventoried for the district, even though they, like the Orpheum, were excluded from the boundaries. So any other questions on the map before we move on? Okay. All right, so there, our code has this helpful graphic in it, possibly helpful, I don't know, possibly helpful, possibly. A lot of people love flowcharts and ask for more flowcharts, but then sometimes you look at the ones that are in our code and see the faces don't speak to the helpfulness. But so this is the beginning of the development review section, and we're gonna kind of go through this more. And I'm happy to skip back to this slide if you want to look at it. But essentially, so the the development plans prepared at the top, that's some of those, the building permit application, the site plan that we talked about earlier. And our code differentiates with what can be reviewed and approved administratively by the Heritage Preservation Officer and what requires going to the Heritage Preservation Commission for review. And essentially, in terms of a development within the overlays, I can administratively review a certificate of no effect, although I can pass that on to the commission if I deem that to be necessary for you to review it. And I can also review any matter referred by the commission to me. And so that, in the case of the overlays, is often, you see a certificate of appropriateness and approve it with specific mitigation or other conditions, and then leave it up to me to, follow through and make sure that conditions are met and approve them. And Sarah, let's jump in.
Right. And I think one of the things that we've caught some mistakes on in the past that's worth mentioning there is that, as we were talking about earlier, Commissioner Dominguez, you need to state in your motion exactly what you're giving the HPO administrative authority over, because there may come a point further down the building permit path that something changes or there's a proposed change, and the HPO has to make a determination. Is this a modification of their certificate of appropriateness or something that fell within the scope of the initial review in a manner that I can approve administratively? And like that line seems like it would be really straightforward, but it will only be straightforward when your motions are clear about what administrative reviews are going to the HPO. Does that make sense? Like there have been times where it's just like, and the HPO can review the rest administratively. Well, is it like anything goes? Or like, where is that line where it needs to come back and be a modified certificate of appropriateness? So it's just an important thing to bear in mind. Just like when Lauren gets a certificate of no effect application, and as my daughter says, it's cringe, she might send it to you. So, and say, no, I know this is a certificate of no effect. but I'm not comfortable approving it and I'm referring it to the commission. That is that little back and forth arrow there. I think
Right.
it's equally important that those shared tasks between the commission and the HPO are really clear. I think that is probably in the flow chart that when there are things that sort of are right on the line, that's where the clarity of your motion can be very, very, very important. And, Lauren's suspicions that maybe this is might meet the letter of the code for a certificate of no effect, but maybe not the spirit of it. She can get that in front of you for a sounding board.
Yeah, Commissioner Westheimer.
Okay, Amy, I'm pushing the button. Sorry about that before. A question, Sarah, I don't know if it was a slip or if there are times where you can approve things that Lauren can't, because you said something about that you could approve it.
That would be
rather than
when,
Lauren.
if, I'm on vacation or
Yeah.
incapacitated, then Sarah or our planning director, Michelle McNulty, could serve as the acting heritage preservation officer. So of course, as you know, and the however many months it was between Mark leaving and me starting in this position, Sarah was the acting heritage preservation officer.
Right. I think that, so we actually have our process we use internally is if Lauren is, as she said, homesick and not able to work or on vacation, she sends out an email and says, hi, everyone, including all the people who are signing permit reviews. I am unavailable and Sarah is the acting HPO. And then the once every other year that this happens where Lauren and I are both gone for maybe a day or two, or one time it happened for like a week or two, which was unfortunate because someone was sick while someone was on vacation, then we have a process that we give to all the planners that says, here is what you can review and give feedback on your own. And we empower them to do like some really basic things. And then they have to turn anything more complicated over to the planning director, because the planning director worked at SHPO. She has historic preservation experience. So unlike a lot of things, it really confuses HR that like someone who is a subordinate in the org chart is passing responsibilities up the chain, but it's because her position description is where it lives. And we did add at one point like acting HPO as part of my description, and then I pass it to my boss. And luckily she is also qualified. If she wasn't, we might change that business practice because the person in that position might not be comfortable being the reviewer on those things. So we generally do that because whoever is doing the reviews should be qualified, right? Meet those same qualifications that someone preparing a cultural resource study for you should. So, some days I looked at Eric Vondi, who's Ariana's predecessor, and I was like, are you sure I'm qualified for this? And he said, yeah, you're absolutely qualified. You have more than enough experience to do this. But we do check that that's true. So another example of like Lauren showing you code, there's also like a business practice behind the code, and like it has documentation, and we have like a procedure for that.
And we're going to dive into all of these certificates in the code. So I'll just leave with this slide and saying that, so my authority to, make administrative approvals ends with a certificate of no effect. And then all of the other ones I refer to up to the commission. Okay, so first, the certificate of no effect. So these are, of course, all the ones that you see. And last, what did you say? I get a cringy one potentially in the future, but for the most part, these are the ones that you see in the approvals section of the agenda. And so this is generally appropriate if it's going to be, compatible and there will be no major impact. So not diminishing, eliminating, or adversely affecting the significance or integrity of the resource. So yeah, the compatible and the no major impact, two of the takeaways for applicability. And then, so each of these certificates in the code has an applicability section and then a criteria for approval section. And so for the first two, they're very similar, but so the criteria for approval, so again, talking about compatibility with its context and defining what that is for a landmark, individual landmark, or for a historic overlay zone. And another important point here, so the cultural resources associated have been sufficiently identified and evaluated. So this, of course, that goes back to the cultural resources requirement. So oftentimes, we, for the most part in the overlays, we do have the National Register documentation, we have the inventory forms, but then there are odd cases like 19 West Birch where we didn't, even though it was in the overlay. So we did, triggered both things. We had to do the cultural resource study to sufficiently identify and evaluate, and then also had to do the certificate process. And then, again, no major impacts is the big underline here. And as all of the certificates are going to be in overlays, that also means that they have applicable development standards and design guidelines. So there are specific ones for the town site and downtown, and then there are a general one that applies to all of the landmarks that are kind of in a floating landmark overlay. And so go through some examples. Certificate of no effect, actually, these are very specific examples that are included in the code. So which is kind of an interesting section. This is under the HPO authority part at the top of the code. It specifically says that I can approve through a certificate of no effect minor work that has a limited impact in relation to the total cultural resource, including signs. So that's a common thing that you see are the signs that meet the design guidelines for downtown. And a remodel, addition, deck or porch that does not expand the floor area or any outdoor activity area by more than 10% or 200 feet. This one and the next one, an accessory structure that is not more than the lesser of 10% of the building's main footprint or 400 square feet. I think both of those could fall into that category of like, yes, potentially the code says that I could administratively approve as a certificate of no effect someone increasing their building with an addition that meets this definition, but it's not, this I think is a great case of if that, addition was going to be remodel involving the front of the building, really changing the facade, needing a lot of review with the design guidelines, that technically, if it meets our code criteria, that could still be a candidate to kick up to the commission because there's a lot more to weigh in there. And to meet it, like with the town site, the spirit of the town site, standards and guidelines also includes that public noticing component. So if there was so I would feel if I got this in the town site, that I would want the commission to see that, there to be the public hearing and it to have that public noticing, because I think so just as I don't know if it's cringy, but it's an example of that. But then the number 4 is where we're going to see a lot of this, the minor alterations. The big one here that you see a lot is roofing. So a lot of re-roofing in kind. I process those as certificates of no effect. And I all of these other things, fencing, paint colors, things like that are pretty straightforward. And again, go back to that minor work, limited impact in relation to the total resource. And then number 5, so demolition or removal of inappropriate features. So, somebody who's doing some work to restore their property, undoing something that's been done before, taking out inappropriate, window replacements and putting back something that's a little better. Something like that could be approved by me as a certificate of no effect. It also could include demolition of things that, are not significant, that are not contributing to the overlay. And as well as other, like accessory buildings and smaller structures on the parcel. So if somebody wanted to, remove their non-historic ADU, I could approve that as a certificate of no effect. And this one, modifications to support systems and talking about various mechanical systems, like, yes, I could approve somebody's satellite dish installation or something like that. And the main thing I've seen in my time in that category is installation and screening of HVAC equipment in the downtown overlay, which is generally going to be on the roof, and how that meets the screening criteria in the downtown design handbook.
Now in residential and actually commercial, we have these splits that they put on the sides. That's going to be a dilemma when they're visible from the street. So good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, I will say if we get to revising our downtown design handbook, the screening is one area that could use a lot of beefing up, as it was mainly written for hiding trash cans. And then vaguely refers to other things, but it really didn't foresee in 1990 the array of things that people will be trying to stick on their buildings and hide. So any other certificate of no effect things before we get into appropriateness? Okay. All right. So certificate of appropriateness. So now we're getting into more of the territory of, this is a significant cultural resource. It is being altered in some way, but we're still deeming that it's appropriate. It's going to be compatible with the character of the resource, and that all major impacts are mitigated, such that the work does not diminish, eliminate, or adversely affect the significance. And so if you notice like the changes here, right? So one, the last one said that there would be no major impacts. Now there could be major impacts, but we're going to mitigate them. And before it was really minor work, and now we're talking about, like a bigger rehabilitation or other project. And criteria for approval. So a lot of this is really similar to the last one. So, we're still talking about that it's compatible and defining what that is, and that the resource has been sufficiently identified and evaluated. But the major changes, again, D. So now before there was no major impacts, now there could be major impacts on cultural resources, but they are sufficiently mitigated. And then E is the same, that they would still follow the design standards and guidelines. So the code doesn't have specific examples, so I just kind of wrote up and grabbed some photos of some things that we've looked at recently. So recent examples, someone is going to put in a new ADU or garage in the town site. We've looked at a few of those recently. Or let's say there's a vacant lot and they're going to put a new infill building that could be downtown or town site. And then it's going to have to follow the design guidelines. So even though, that's not a historic resource, the new building, it's going to still have to be compatible with the historic overlay zone. Exterior remodel or addition. And that would really be the case with both of these. So if you remember the one in town site here that's on the left, that was both hit by a car and had underlying structural issues. So the commission reviewed a certificate of appropriateness for the repair work to the stucco, and then also a lot of major foundation work. And we also did a grant for that project. Yes.
I have a question about that. So I remember when that gable over the porch or the front door was added. I don't know if that came before HPC. I think it was after the overlay was in place. It's useless. It doesn't look right. Would you ever say no?
Could we say no?
Or require a change in design so that it would be, more appropriate?
As long as it was consistent with the design standards and guidelines of the overlay. Just that we think it's kind of silly, of course, isn't going to cut it. But if, you know, you can point to something specific standards that it's not meeting, you know, those could be made. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I think that's a really good question because it illustrates the quasi-judicial idea, right? So quasi-judicial means you are all acting as like a court-like proceeding, and you have to use the findings of fact, which is why your staff reports look the way they do, right? We quote all the parts of the code that may be applicable. You know, we build it as kind of a record of what you're reviewing so that you can show you've used all the facts associated with the code and the property and the town site overlay in that case on the left, and you know, the downtown overlay in the case on the right, and they were all considered as part of your hearing. So like when you think of hearing, you are acting as kind of a board or panel that is, you know, judging things, but you can't just bring in an opinion. You have to tie it somewhere to the record. You have to tie it to the code. You have to say, I don't think this meets this part of the town site overlay, and here is why, you know. And also then you have to look at the scope of the proposal. So for instance, if that gable was existing and the proposal didn't propose to modify it in any way, you couldn't really require them to take it off, because that's not within the scope of their proposal. If their proposal was to alter that gable, then it falls into the breadth of what you're reviewing quasi-judicially. So that's why that's like important to remember about your commission, compared to like sustainability or transportation, which are important commissions and talk about really important things, but are totally advisory. So they can, when you're in an advisory role, and sometimes you are in an advisory role like you were with the 2-spot today. So there you're in an advisory role and you can do those things. But when you've got the packet with the staff report, you've got to think more in the quasi-judicial mindset, which is why we put those in a separate section called public hearings.
So with that project on the left as an example, that's more of a modern style porch covering where people love those long posts. There's nothing like that historically in the neighborhood, but there are many that are lower and useful. And so would it have been judicially allowed to say to the, I mean, I think they did this on a Saturday, to have said, that would fit better in the neighborhood, and there is precedent for this style if you lower it to be more in line with the roof line. I mean, can we say things like that?
Yeah, you can make suggestions for sure. I think to Sarah's point, I can't think of all of the relevant standards and guidelines off the top of my head to pull into this, but you know, there are, you know, if it wasn't, you know, meeting the roof line standards, you know, they had changed the roof pitch to get this to do something, you know, there were some cases like, okay, maybe it specifically doesn't meet that. I mean, this is in general kind of weird because it's not even oriented to the street. So I think it doesn't meet a few of them anyways, but you know, that's where maybe you could require they come back with a new design that does meet all of the standards, you know, versus more of a suggestion that, you know, couldn't be a requirement.
Yeah, and if I remember this case correctly, it was not the corner with the gable or with the more modern gable that was hit by the car. It was
no, it was the other side.
It was the back corner, the other side. So that's why that gable was kind of outside the scope, because they were not proposing to modify it. And it wasn't part of the scope of work within their certificate. So that scope of work section at the front of your staff report is important. You can't just go, well, we don't like this other thing about your property that's not in your scope of work and we want you to modify it. That's unless it's a whole new building. That's part of that, like the bounds that we're trying to show you as Lauren composes a staff report.
And I think Commissioner Westheimer, you were thinking this was a separate project that happened earlier. So just hypothetical, if we were reviewing the certificate of appropriateness for that when it had happened, what comments could we have made?
That's one question.
Okay, second question, go.
What if they did it on a Saturday and we saw it? And we brought it to the attention of the HPO to say they did this on a Saturday. There's no precedent in the neighborhood. And I do believe the overlay says to look to see what exists and base your designs on what exists historically. So from that point of view, it seems we could say to them, there's nothing like this historically.
Well, this is going to be a great example. And I'm glad to bring this up because I think we're going to use it again later on. So here's what would happen is if a watchful neighbor sent me an email or called me and told me about something that he or she witnessed on a Saturday, not to say this has ever happened before, I would immediately talk to our building inspector. And well, first I would look up and see if a building permit was pulled. Assuming that it wasn't, I would go to building safety, talk to our building inspection team, let them know what happened. They would issue a stop work order until it was corrected. And at that point, yes, then this is pretty minor. I mean, if it was just that, but especially this happened in another part of town recently where a much bigger porch was put on. And it's in a house that's essentially a new build, but that got caught. A stop work order was issued. They had to submit as-built plans, and because the roof was extended, structural load calculations, do all of that, and then have everyone review it. So if this happened in the town site or the downtown overlay, then at that point, they would have to still apply for a certificate of appropriateness and come in. Of course, it is going to be already built, but if it didn't meet, the guidelines, the commission could still ask for changes. But we'll put a pin in that though, and then come back to it later when we get to economic hardship, because that could be a great example. We'll use this poor house as an example for all of the things. And then the other photo here, this is the lumberjack pizza, not to get confused with things across the street in the railroad tracks. And this was also a recent grant, which is why I have photos of both of them from my inspections. And this one also got hit by a car, and they had to totally redo the whole front canopy over the sidewalk and redid the sign and the stucco up top. So they did make alterations to the front. This is a different material type, and the canopy does look a little different than the last one. So all of that also came in for certificate of appropriateness. And so those are just a few examples, but here generally it would be other projects that are going to conform to the design standards for the overlay and sufficiently mitigate all major impacts. All right, so now we're getting into certificate of economic hardship. And so this one, the applicability, if it's appropriate, if the proposed work, including demolition and appropriate mitigation measures, will derive the property owner of reasonable use of or a reasonable economic return on the property, or will result in a substantial reduction in the economic value of the property, or will result in a substantial economic burden on the property owner because the property owner cannot reasonably maintain the property in its current form. And the criteria for approval here, so again, that same sufficiently identified and evaluated cultural resources, and then proving that an economic hardship exists. And then second examples, lack of reasonable use or return, substantial reduction in value, substantial burden. Preservation is economically infeasible. The economic hardship is not a self-created hardship. And alternate development has been fully explored, and alternate financing has been fully explored. So going back to our porch, okay, so you built this thing on a Saturday without a permit. It comes in, we decide, we meaning the commission in this case, hey, it doesn't meet the design guidelines. So that's a great question. But they say, nope, we've already built it. We can't afford to replace it. would they qualify for a certificate of economic hardship if the commission denied their certificate of appropriateness? And
The economic hardship is that they spent too much money on materials.
right. Well,
to
and here
begin with,
this
because
is
it's useless.
and that is number D, right? Or number D, letter D. It's a self-created harm. So they did this to themselves. So they caused the problem. They didn't follow the code. So now coming back in and saying that, oh, well, it'll be too expensive for me to do anything else. Like, I think D is where you could question whether or not it meets the criteria for a certificate of economic hardship. But, generally speaking, yeah, probably not in that case, show that it would be totally economically infeasible to correct it. But maybe, if they've already, cut into the roof line to add that thing, some of the things would be to then move it down and have it be lower would be hard to do. Maybe it would, they could show that it would create structural issues or something to change it. But something to think about. But just as a good example of D. Okay, so we actually only have one example in the history of Flagstaff code of a certificate of economic hardship. And I was not here for this, so Sarah, do you want to explain it?
Yeah, sure. So a condominium development that is not contributing to the town site district had their HOA board make a decision to hire a contractor and purchase new windows for all the units using their HOA money. So the individual property owners didn't make this decision, the HOA board did. This was right after we had adopted a new building code or energy code that required a further window replacement review, and the contractor was not up to speed on that code change. And so they did not get the proper permits. The inspectors were on the lookout for people who didn't know the new rules, and so they worked it right away. Like a inspector went by and said, nope, stop replacing windows. Well, they had already replaced the windows on one unit, and that person had a fixed income and did not have money they had the money to contribute the first time, but not the second time. They had gone from replacing wood windows with vinyl windows, which, as we know, is a step down in window quality for historic preservation purposes. But given that the building was non-contributing, that the owner of the actual unit couldn't afford their money to replace it, the HOA still had to basically flush the money they'd spent on all these other windows and do a whole new round of window replacement. Because of this error, the commission got to consider a certificate of economic hardship at that time. And the HOA, the president and the board came in and they said, we should have been more informed on this. It won't happen again, but please don't punish this one resident. And that was basically the rationale. And she provided, as part of that application, basically personal financial information for the consideration of what her income looked like. And also the HOA board provided financial information on how they made this decision and what funding was available and kind of how they ended up here. And so that it's very different than a certificate of appropriateness because you get some pretty personal information out on the public record. And so that has been our only case. It was really pretty minor. They did some things kind of with the trim on the windows to kind of make it blend a little more. It wasn't in the street facing side of the property. So it had a lot of considerations where the commission, we could have made them rip out all the windows and put in more expensive ones, but chose not to in that case. And so that's what it is. It's kind of your mercy certificate, and you can use it that way when you feel it's appropriate or when the building is so structurally unsound, you don't think it can be saved. For instance, that was outside of a district where if it had been, it probably would have been in front of you, was there are houses that are probably historic, but are not in a district or in an area we've inventoried, but they are on a fault line and every single one of their foundations is cracking irreparably because they were built in a geologically inappropriate area before geotech reports were required. That is not, if that were in the town side or the downtown, we would bring those to you as hardships, because that kind of foundation repair is well outside, is the cost of replacing a full building because you basically, they're concrete slabs and they have to have like integrated rebar, and you can't like replace the whole slab of a building without replacing the whole building. And so those are the kinds of things that I think staff would bring certificate of economic hardships for. It's those really tough cases where this is just like a no fault problem that's caused by either geology or, you know, maybe decision making that wasn't, you know, fully informed because we were in a transition and we hadn't gotten all the education out that we had hoped for at that time. You know, that's what we've experienced here in Flagstaff. Never anything major, you know, and so we've not used all the parts of our certificate of economic hardship language in the code.
How do you communicate with contractors as to code changes or things that they may not even realize need to be reviewed, and especially if they're in a district?
I mean, contractors are required via their contracting license to investigate local requirements before beginning work. And so it is their liability when they mess it up, honestly. And that is, you know, I know we were talking about the case earlier, but getting demolition permits for a building over 50 years old should be standard knowledge of any contractor. Assuming that
Getting
everyone,
a demolition permit of any kind.
yeah, but
should be
especially on a
standard
building over 50 years old that might have lead paint and asbestos and have environmental issues, that is a well-known requirement. Sometimes people get excited and do it themselves, and that's DIY is always tough because they don't have a license, and we miss a lot of those. I mean, during COVID, I once heard the building official say, it was shocking how many people forgot they still needed permits from the city to do work on their house. We all got trapped at home and suddenly watched a lot of YouTube and things were happening, and inspectors had to be all over it all the time. So, I mean, I think there's just times where, you know, when there's new code or there's new requirements and the building official puts out notices and, you know, talks to the industry groups and make sure that information get out. But if somebody from a different part of the state who's maybe not in the loop on that comes and just takes an odd job as a favor to someone they know in Flagstaff, we can miss those things. Or when people are working out of the areas they're really familiar with, it still is a contractor's responsibility to be familiar with that. And there was one occasion where a contractor did something egregious enough that the commission asked the building official to file a complaint against them. That's not very typical, but it was something that like could have destroyed the whole building and was done without a permit. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that there's kind of work with the building official, and there's awareness of that. But the building official doesn't take on the contractor's licensed responsibilities for them. Their responsibility is to make that information available so that any contractor could find it. There is like liability and responsibility there
And that's why we're doing the reviews. So
Right.
if you follow the usual process, you're a contractor, you come and you get your permit, then the experts in the code are going to review it and then catch those things like, oh, our LVR rating paint requirement has changed and you need, you know, to demonstrate this on your plan set, or you didn't include the window specs that we need to see to make sure it meets the code requirements. And those are, I don't know, 2 examples I'm pulling from a review this week that I saw. So, you know, these are the specific things. So I threw in one larger example that's been in the news recently in Phoenix, because they put this to the test more than we do. And I'm going to try and summarize it. And Ariana, if I say anything that's totally inaccurate, please feel free to correct me or add anything. I will preface this by their code is different than ours. It is written differently. They do have a certificate of economic hardship. They also have a certificate or an application just for demolition. So it looks like ours in some ways, but it operates a little bit differently. But the Phoenix Laundry and Dry Cleaning Building in downtown Phoenix, the property owners the families owned it, I believe since like the 1950s. The building was built in the 1930s. They had it listed for sale for a very long time. It weren't able to sell it and applied for a certificate of economic hardship, with, the plans basically of demolishing it. And their arguments in this case were that essentially the historic status of the building, was preventing the sale, because it was limiting their return, potential market value of the building, because with that they weren't able to sell it because whoever they were going to sell it to would want to demolish it, so they weren't able to sell it. They also claimed that to rehabilitate the building would be a $10 million cost. The building is primarily significant because of a unique roof structure, and the roof rehabilitation was $10 million. And I'm sure there's more, to the story, but those were the major arguments, that preserving it and rehabilitating it to continue using it for them or a new owner would be cost prohibitive, and that they were unable to sell it and get their money out of the property. There were, because of their code differences, there were also parallel things going on. There was also a case reviewing putting a landmark overlay on the property, which then their code is very different from ours in that regard. And as I mentioned, like the ultimate goal of demolition. And in this case, both the Heritage Preservation Commission and then the City Council denied the certificate of economic hardship. But my understanding is that it was at least the reasons pointed to in the denial were that they didn't adequately prove, the money side of it. Like, okay, you're saying it's going to cost $10 million for you to do this, but, how are you proving that you can't afford that? That's unreasonable, the quotes for that sort of thing. But on the flip side, the landmark overlay was denied. So this is still, I believe, an ongoing case. Is that correct, Ariana? Yeah. So, or sorry.
Hi guys, Ariana Urban with SHPO. Forgive me, I have a migraine, so I'll do my best. But this building is, as far as I know, incredibly significant. It is one of the only true streamlined modern buildings that exist in Phoenix. There are very few of them in the state, and this roof structure, it's called Lamella, and it is highly significant for its engineering. And its place in engineering history. And the Phoenix HPC was trying to work with the property owner to preserve at least parts of the building. They really wanted to save the 7th Avenue facade, which is it's a stunning building, this gorgeous streamlined facade, and then the lamella roof. And the unfortunate part is that the air rights for this property are the highest in the state. And there's only like 1 square mile of properties in all of Arizona that is able to build as high as is allowed on this property. And so the owners were claiming that the property was worth $25 million because of the potential to develop much taller stories. And so the property owners were, I went to all of these Phoenix HPC meetings because this was interesting. The property owners were very contentious, exclaiming that they would never be able to retire if this building didn't sell. And the city of Phoenix was genuinely just trying to find a way to preserve 2 small components of a large parcel. And the property owners said no. And like Lauren said, they applied for economic hardship. And in an economic hardship situation, the burden of proof is always on the property owner. So it is up to the property owner to provide statements of personal income and provide bids from contractors to provide potential offers from developers, and all of that, the math has to math when you look at when the HPC and the city council will look at all those things. So ultimately, Lauren is right. Their economic hardship certificate was denied, but the landmark overlay initiation by this Phoenix HPC was also denied. And so at this point, they are free to apply for the demo permit, and they only have to wait 30 days to, oh no, wait. Actually, that's wrong. They already went through the 30-day process in which the Phoenix HPC then initiated the landmark overlay. So at this point, I actually was just reading up on the latest staff report from City of Phoenix, and the case is closed. This property will not be landmarked. It will not be saved, but not because of economic hardship, just City Council decided in favor of the owner. And this sucks, but, and I tell CLGs this, like, sometimes the process is just what it is, and it is really sad. But historic preservation, zoning, landmarking process can't overrule the city council, and the city council ultimately gets to decide what to do. So that's an economic hardship app. We almost always see these in terms of demolition. I've never heard of a non-contributing building with a wind. I didn't really understand that one, but we don't normally solicit economic hardships for something like that. These are major demolitions, and they often get, kind of emotional and contentious. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Any questions, ideas, other thoughts on economic hardship? Yeah, it's hard without a lot of local examples. There's one huge case. And I think, yeah, some of the things that we've talked about before could be sort of potential cases that might come forward. And I think maybe, as Ariana was saying, with the windows, like maybe that could have still been an appropriateness, with mitigation or something else to get there to mitigate the major impact. So, and then moving into temporary delay of demolition. So, and this is different than Phoenix, where it had all these like parallel processes happening at the same time. Ours is structured a little differently. So you would, you'd follow the path. So you wouldn't get to a temporary delay of demolition unless you had already applied for a certificate of economic hardship, and that was denied by the Heritage Preservation Commission. And, presumably at that point, if they could have appealed to city council, and then let's say in that case, presumably if they had appealed, it was also denied. And then it could go into a temporary delay of demolition for a period of 1 year from the date of the public meeting when the request was denied. And so, and this is, also Phoenix is very different because they have a 30-day and a 1 year clause. It's all based on a variety of factors. Ours is more straightforward. And again, this is just within the overlays. It doesn't apply to other significant buildings in the rest of town. It's only going to come into play in an overlay. Same with the certificate of economic hardship. And so during the temporary delay period, the idea is that, they would use this year acting in good faith with the city, with the commission, with other state, local groups, interested parties to try and find some kind of alternative or find a buyer who's willing to, pay market value for the property to preserve it. And it requires that the owner, advertise the property for sale based on appraisals, and then following the delay period, though, the clock runs out. if there is, no reasonable alternative or plan has come up, then they can move forward with obtaining a demolition permit. And so this one is a little different than the certificates, which have like the criteria for approval. This just has this paragraph in the code, and we've never faced it here. The city of Flagstaff has never done a temporary delay of demolition, to the best of Sarah and I's knowledge. So we have no Flagstaff examples. I do know the Mystery Castle in Phoenix, though, did go through a 1-year temporary delay of demolition. You may remember the Mayhicks house and the Mystery Castle were the 11 most endangered historic properties. 2 of the 11, but the 2 in Arizona this year, so which made me think of it. And essentially what happened in this case, the Mystery Castle Foundation, as I understand it, was running out of funds, couldn't maintain the property, couldn't maintain the business model, talked to the city of Phoenix about what their options were. And I don't know the full backstory. I imagine there are some other things like code compliance, things that were, upkeep coming into play. But they decided to apply for a demolition permit, which requires a demolition application, and then triggered this 1-year temporary delay of demolition. So it is different from our code because they didn't go through the economic hardship. They didn't have to go through the economic hardship process. And the clock ran out. They went, we're hoping to gather more advocacy, and I think funding was the main hope during this period. I don't know that they necessarily were applying with the intent of demolishing it, but from what I understand from the National Trust, the intent was that they would help raise the profile to find other solutions during that 1 year. Unfortunately, it did not. It's expired, but since then it had the 11 most listing. So I think that has done that. And so now they're working with the National Trust and others, and more, hopefully, options are surfacing. But go ahead, Commissioner Westheimer.
Question for you. If the foundation took out they wanted to demolish it to bring awareness, right? So
that's
in theory, but
yeah.
If it expires, do they have to demolish it, or
No.
can they change their mind?
Yeah, no, they don't have to, because they just applied, but they don't have to. And they haven't yet, to my knowledge. They're still working on solutions, but they could, because they've gone through that period. So if they were to say now, all right, we haven't been able to sell it, we don't have the funding to maintain it, this is the best option. Or maybe now they think they can sell it because they have this pre-approved, essentially, that the next owner could develop it however they wanted.
They didn't demolish it. They waited 5 years. They couldn't figure it out. Would they have to, if it were in Flagstaff, would they have to reapply for a new demolition permit?
Yes. I mean, if they'd actually applied for the permit, the permits have a time frame on them. So yeah, so the permit probably would have expired. I mean, we don't necessarily in the code have anything saying that if you went through the 1-year delay of demolition that you couldn't wait 5-6 more years before you applied for the demolition permit. I think that would be an interesting case if that came up, if, somebody did and they had it, and then, we'd have to evaluate what authority the commission had at that point if the circumstances had changed. There is somewhere at the beginning of our code, there is a paragraph that talks about development applications and timing. I don't know if there would be anything in there, but this text doesn't specifically call out into the code. So that would be a really interesting case if that was to ever come up.
Yeah, I mean, when I first got here 12 years ago, if you put in an application and it got approved, it was approved like forever and ever, but that became difficult as building codes were changing and things like that. And so that was changed to have like a timing when you can have you have like a year to pull your permits, and then there's some extensions. But if you never put in for a permit, it probably would be difficult to decide if it's moot or if this is a permanent approval. That's probably something, because we've never approved a certificate of economic hardship for a demolition or not approved one and never have used this part of the code. This is the unused portion of the code. There would be attorneys involved. It would be,
Right.
we would not be
definitely
making
be a
that
legal
call
question.
as individual staff members.
That's an interesting one, though. I mean, I would hope that if that much time had passed, they would at least try to sell it, find a new buyer or something. So as the circumstances may have changed, but I don't know whether or not that could be required under the code to go through the certificate process again and do another delay of demolition. Any other real or hypothetical questions about what we would do if we were faced with a temporary delay of demolition? And Sarah also brings up a good point. Just to reiterate, we do have city attorneys who can, meet with the commission. That's what you have, the executive session, part that's on the agenda. You could request that. You could, if you wanted that advice before making a decision, or there are parts that are unclear, especially if we were to get into water that Sarah and I don't have any experience with either, that is another great option to consider.
Yeah, I would say if any application comes across Lauren's desk and it even could become a certificate of economic hardship, we usually we go ask questions right away. We go talk to SHPO, we go look for similar cases, we talk to attorneys. That's not when we know early on that that's a potential path for something. We've so far not ended up on that path, but we've always gathered all the resources we have at our availability because it's complicated. And we want to make sure procedurally that the commission and staff are following the right steps from start to finish. Because if we get off track or we start not following our process, that becomes an appeal point that could undo anything that the commission tried to do. That's important to remember in all these quasi judicial things. If you're not following procedures or Lauren's not following procedures as written, then sometimes those can be decisions that get overturned.
And I was hoping my next slide was appeal, but I forgot there's still 2 more before we get there. It would have been the perfect transition. You almost teed it up, but okay. So we talked a bit about major impacts earlier, the difference between the different certificates. Certificate of no effect doesn't have a major impact. Certificate of appropriateness could have a major impact that the commission deems as being sufficiently mitigated. So I also wanted to just include what are major impacts as defined by the code. So this is demolition or other physical destruction or damage to wall or part of a resource. Significant alteration that is not consistent with applicable standards and guidelines, relocation or isolation of the cultural resource from its setting, excessive replacement of original materials, alteration of the character of the resource's setting, introduction of visual, audible, atmospheric elements that are out of character with the cultural resource or its setting, and neglect of a cultural resource, resulting in deterioration or destruction. Charity, do you have a question?
I'm trying to imagine what an audible impact that is out of character.
Sure. I saw this a lot when I worked for ADOT, because when you're in the business of building noisy freeways, they can indeed have, an audible impact that actually changes, the quality of life and the setting. I mean, there are, rare situations too where the noise could be so much that it actually had some kind of physical alteration due to vibrations and things. Seems extremely rare. But if, we were to build an interstate through the middle of a National Register district, something like that, were to put a brand new airport, bring in the Air Force and have them flying really noisy fighter jets over a historic district, something like that could happen. So it's possible, but it's generally not going to be at the scale that the commission is going to look at. If it was going to be some major project like that, it would probably be a Section 106 project that the SHPO is reviewing.
Okay, thanks. That makes total sense. I was imagining like someone adding a roof and like the tiles. And I was like, what? Like there's too many birds now. I was like so confused. But it's not like an outs. Okay, that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it would mostly be right. Those like indirect effects. Somebody is building some giant thing next to a historic property that is indirectly affecting them.
What would be an atmospheric element?
I think that is an interesting one.
Purina factory.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Or like something that makes a lot of smoke or pollution,
Right.
maybe.
Purina factory is
A landfill
from Picture Canyon.
would have atmospheric impacts, like a landfill.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a great example though. Of both, like they're significant industrial things right near Picture Canyon. If that had been landmarked and had a review process before any of those went into effect, like maybe it would have been determined that some of them were having a major impact on it. And how can major impacts be mitigated? So these, we talk about this a lot. You commonly see these in your phase 1 reports, suggestions for mitigation. So this is again direct from the code. This is mitigation per the code, prioritized in descending order of importance, and preference, not necessarily importance. But so of course, avoiding by just not doing it, preserving in place, minimizing the impacts if possible by limiting the degree, magnitude, etc. And then if not, allowing other parties to acquire cultural resources. So in this case, that could be salvage, as was a mitigation measure for the David Babbitt House demolition, was architectural salvage. It could be, moving the May Hicks house, other things like that. And then data recovery, which, mostly we think of data recovery in terms of archaeology, but that is also essentially the goal of a phase 2 report for the commission as well, right? Is you're exhausting the information potential for a site, which traditionally has been taken to mean doing as-built architectural drawings and archival level photography. So now we're in appeals. So as Sarah mentioned, of course, my decisions and your decisions could be appealed, and the grounds on which they could be appealed are how we're interpreting, applying, or enforcing, this division and the code. And then there is this 1030-30-80. This is in what's in the Heritage Preservation Code specifically, but then it calls out to another section of the zoning code with the established procedures overall. And that had another possibly less helpful chart than the last one that's in the code that I took a screenshot of. And so some of the major points with appeals, so they have to be filed with the city clerk. And that's an appeal for the commission within 10 days. So if, for example, you approved the cultural resource study for the phase 1 tonight, I'm going to, write that up as a notice of decision, get that posted tomorrow, and then, I'll copy the city clerk on it so she is aware of the notice of decision, and someone has 10 calendar days from that time to appeal to the city clerk. And this is in example, of the types of things that, could be appealed. So certificate of appropriateness, hardship, no effect. I mean, in that case, if I made the no effect decision, it would be appealed to the commission instead of your decision being appealed to city council. Conditional use permits isn't us. That's just happened to be in the middle of the list here. And then cultural resource studies. And so the appeal does require a fee. There is a filing fee to appeal. And you do have to be an aggrieved person, you know, essentially with standing to appeal. So you can't just be anybody from the community or not from the community with money to file an appeal. It does have to, you know, specifically be aggrieved by the decision. And, you know, they also need to point to what part of the code or the process wasn't followed. You know, did we skip a step? You know, was the decision based on something that is not in the code or contradicts what's in the code? And go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, and that's why you hear staff reminding you that anything you're saying here on the record can be used as part of an appeal. So if you are bringing up things that are not tied to the code in your discussion, we want you to be really mindful of that. It's not always inappropriate, and there's plenty of times where it's just like suggesting and talking, but especially any case that could end up in an appeal, you want to maybe make some notes and choose your words carefully, because if you misspeak on the record, it is part of the appeal record. So that's just, you know, part of being mindful of that. The one time since I've been involved in the program that we had an appeal, and I know Commissioner Westheimer was not on the commission at the time and was part of the group that filed the appeal, it says a non-refundable filing fee, and what that means, whether you win or lose the appeal, we don't give it back. But in that case, the commission, and remember, this is really important to remember, there's part of your board and commission book that allows you to reconsider decisions. And so the appeal was filed, and then a commissioner notified staff that they would like a special meeting called to reconsider. So they wanted to make a motion to reconsider, and they asked us to call a special meeting and put it on the agenda. And we did. We called a special meeting. We had a motion to reconsider the previous decision. The commission decided that they wanted to completely reconsider that decision. They weren't happy with how they had made it. They were following the board and commission procedures, and that made that appeal moot, because the decision that the appellants were trying to appeal didn't exist anymore, because it had been rescinded essentially through that reconsideration process. So I want to bring to your attention that, because that is important. If you feel like you need something reconsidered, you can request that within a certain number of time. It's in your board and commission manual, and that can come back. We can call special meetings to do reconsiderations. You know, we've got to be able to get a quorum at that next meeting to be able to do that. But that's kind of how the last one played out. But if it had gone to appeal and the council had agreed with the commission and the applicant instead of the appellant, then that fee would not have been refunded. And it is like several $1,000s. It's not like a couple $100. It's meant to be like, you really have to prepare an appeal packet and make it as good a case as you can. So it's got a lot of elements to it. It's important to remember, like, this is also us using our boards and commissions manual, making sure we're working these things together. That was, you know, a commissioner who had been probably on the commission the longest and then stepped off and stepped back on. So he was super familiar, and he was able to kind of quickly work the process. So that's why studying and reviewing your board and commission manual is important. Knowing that these appeal procedures can come up is important. Knowing that what you say here on the record becomes an appeal record if one is filed. It's also important.
And with that, that's the end of the training on my slides. But of course, we're happy to answer other questions. Or has everyone had enough of this?
Could you send us those slides, please?
Yes, yeah, I would be happy to. And we'll include them in the minutes. I'll get them to Nancy, so they'll be in the minutes too. This one and the two-spot. So, oh, yes, sorry, Commissioner Horn.
I just want to say thank you for putting this together. I know I can tell it took a lot of work and thought to do that, and I found it really helpful so thank you for the time and doing that.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Horn. Thank you all for listening. I will say we put far fewer people to sleep than the presentation we gave last week.
Yeah, Lauren.
Different topic, but
Lauren took a head count on how many people fell asleep during the regional plan conversation during that hearing. It was great. Nothing like creating soporific material for everyone's enjoyment.
all right. So, well, I'll let Chair Dale move us on.
Sorry, I was reading through the code. All right, we will now move on to item 7C, the historic signs and facades grant tracking. And Sarah, did you need to leave? Yes. I don't think I have the authority or ability to dismiss you, but please go pick up your child.
And there is nothing new from last month. This is the same spreadsheet we looked at last time. Nothing has been completed or inspected yet that's changed. And I believe that both the projects in blue are fairly close, especially the Flagstaff Christian Fellowship. I know that they're pretty close to completion, and they'll reach out when they're done. And the one outstanding one from last fiscal year, I reached out again recently just for a follow-up, and I still haven't heard. So I assume it's still in the situation where the applicant still needs to pay the contractor to then turn around and be reimbursed and provide receipts. So I haven't heard anything on that one. So essentially nothing new. We still have $130,000 to award this year. I talk to new applicants all the time, so I just gotta wrangle someone into actually applying. And then our approvals section. So
we will now move on to approvals.
Yes, sorry.
And reports.
Trying to go too fast. Okay.
Yeah, anything of note in any of these?
Not particularly, unless you have questions. The first one, 100 West Birch, is a new replacement sign at the Chase Bank downtown. Not a historic building or in the district, but it is in the overlay. It does have to follow our design guidelines. It was determined to meet that. There is a new proposed subdivision that is called Shadow Pines that is on the south end of McMillan Mesa. And I determined that a cultural resource study should be required. It is on undeveloped land. I didn't think it met the potential for exemption in the code there. So I required a cultural resource study. They, however, in negative findings, didn't identify any cultural resources and documented it in a letter report. And as it was a letter report, that's one I can approve administratively. And then the next two were re-roofing in kind in the town site. So that's a common, the roof itself is not historic. As we know, roofs have shorter lives generally than the building. So the roof's already been replaced. It's going to be replaced in kind, very minimal visual changes. So those are both processed as certificates of no effect. And then the last one is a report on a Section 106 consultation. So the city of Flagstaff applied for a grant that it is administered by the Federal Highway Administration, and through an operating agreement they have with Arizona Department of Transportation, they have delegated their NEPA and 106 consultation responsibilities to ADOT. So ADOT sent the consultation letter back to me as the Heritage Preservation Officer, even though it is a city project. So kind of a convoluted way of involving as many possible public agencies. But essentially, the project is to put in some new signage in McMillan Mesa, and it has been surveyed before by Lynn Neal, who was here earlier. And, they are aware of where all of the cultural resources are. None of the signage is going to go near them. They're going to be, verified a certain amount of distance away. And so everyone has agreed that that would not be an adverse effect to any of the cultural resources on McMillan Mesa.
Okay, any questions on any of these from commission?
Okay.
The closer we get to 7 o'clock, the fewer questions we have.
Yeah.
Any miscellaneous items? Moving on to the next item.
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
Go
are we
ahead,
going back to
Commissioner
reports and
Westheimer.
approvals?
Miss-
Okay, we have a miscellaneous item from Commissioner Westheimer.
I was reading the minutes and I am curious why the, was it 603 West Birch project with that reclassification? Why was the reclassification included in the motion twice?
Because they hadn't done it.
But is that an HPC responsibility for reclassifying properties?
It is not. However, the commission included it. I mean, as to why it was originally included, that was the commission's decision. That was not my suggestion. And I would agree that it would be required by city staff to do that anyway. So it's not necessary to have included in as a condition of approval. But HPC in the first meeting, which was April or May earlier this year, when hearing the case and talking about the reclassification of the property from a duplex to a single family dwelling with an interior ADU, the commission decided to add that. So that was not my recommendation. It wasn't in my staff report as a recommended condition of approval. So, I mean, in terms of, you know, if you now don't think you needed to have included that, it's history at this point. But it was I included it in my second staff report because at that time it had not been completed yet. And I just said, with both of the ones last month, there were conditions that hadn't yet been completed. So I recommended carrying them forward since that is something the HPC had previously required and was still outstanding. No problem.
All right, any items from staff?
Well, I haven't had a chance to get out there. Hope maybe tomorrow will be the day, but hopefully my contractor should have mobilized this week. Working with our public works staff to stabilize the May Hicks house. So that is hopefully happening right now. So it took a long time to get everything through the city procurement process, but it is approved and they are out there. So so that's good. So this is just that first totally buttoning it up phase. We're still working through other vetting of potential relocation sites and uses and going to be moving forward with that. More to report on that later, but that's the big news for now on that. I'm sure there are many other things, but nothing too major comes to mind.
Anything else from commission? I don't know if you guys talked about it in July, but I drove by the old Grand Canyon Cafe and the new sign is up, the new restaurant sign. And it's definitely different, but it's nice. So I think they did a good job. The restaurant at the new Tapatios on 66, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking.
No, wait, what
so
was it
did
called?
I was thinking it was like they took down their historic sign.
No, sorry.
We're ending the meeting. We're all storming over there. No,
what was it called? The Railroad Cafe?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It was not.
I did. My only thought on that was I didn't realize that I needed to have suggested the metal be repainted before the sign was put up as a condition of approval.
Oh no.
But details to note for the future.
Anyway, so that was just like a thing that I noticed. Anything else? All right, let's go home. It is 6:49 p.m. and I declare this meeting of the Heritage Preservation Commission of September 17th, 2025 adjourned.